Well, never mind all that stuff, because COVID also taught Sunny Hostin how to get her groceries delivered. Yeah, I know, amazing. But that means it's time for...
Living your life and you're feeling low. You don't know what is true. You don't know what's true. So you quick flip through the channels to watch Sunny on The View. Oh my God, the stuff she says is dumb. Where the hell they get this woman from? She's a host who's always crass and lame, with lots of nonsense to proclaim.
Sunny H began to lose her composure, and the atmosphere inside the studio shifted almost instantly. The tension grew so intense it was impossible to ignore, filling every second of airtime. This wasn't simple surprise or momentary confusion. It was the result of Greg Gutfeld pressing his point with exact timing and careful control. Each remark was delivered with precision, landing one after another and forcing reactions that couldn't be smoothed over. The exchange exposed internal contradictions, and once they surfaced, the segment veered off its expected path. What was meant to be a routine discussion quickly turned into an unscripted and uncomfortable moment unfolding live. Longtime viewers sensed something building as the conversation progressed. Even those familiar with heated exchanges could tell this situation was different, more intense, and far less predictable. The pace quickened, responses became strained, and the balance of the discussion slipped away. When the broadcast finally moved on, the energy in the room had completely changed. The conversation left behind a heavy silence, one that lingered well after the cameras stopped rolling. It was the kind of moment that didn't need commentary, because the reaction alone said everything.
The View a lot, but that's only because they keep talking. Those hens are always clucking. They get to say stupid stuff for an hour every day, and then I get to say stupid stuff for an hour every day, except on purpose. But every now and then, one of those dingbats inadvertently says something that reveals modern liberal thought so perfectly it deserves further study. You know, like a weird serpent that washed up on the beach and you want to poke it with a stick.
Sunny reached a breaking point, and it went far beyond the mild friction viewers had grown accustomed to over the years. This was not a brief flare-up or an awkward exchange that could be brushed aside. What unfolded happened clearly, openly, and live in front of a massive audience. The situation escalated rapidly once Greg Gutfeld began laying out inconsistencies with sharp focus. In just a few minutes, more contradictions surfaced than the program typically confronts over long stretches of airtime. The shift was immediate, and the controlled tone of the segment slipped out of reach. What followed was not ordinary on-air tension. It was a visible emotional unraveling that changed the energy of the entire studio. The confidence that had defined Sunny's presence moments earlier faded quickly, replaced by reactions that felt raw and unfiltered. Viewers could sense the turning point as it happened. The exchange became impossible to ignore, drawing attention not because it was loud, but because it was real. Once the balance broke, there was no resetting the moment. It became one of those rare live television scenes that holds attention precisely because no one on either side of the camera saw it coming.
So, Sunny, I bet you haven't been in a supermarket since COVID for about 3 years.
I haven't been in a supermarket since COVID. For about 3 years. That's when I discovered Instacart, and I give them a big tip because they don't always pay their people well, and it's so that's been an issue I think for the company. But man, you can get toiletries, you can get fire logs. You know those big Bounty towels you don't want to carry.
Those from Costco.
Somebody else goes.
Fire logs? She had to tell the audience that she tips big because even she knows she sounds insufferable. Hey, I'm an but at least I tip.
Before getting into the details, viewers were given the familiar reminder to subscribe, setting the stage for what initially looked like a routine episode. The show opened in its usual rhythm: friendly expressions, predictable agreement, and a studio atmosphere built around mutual reinforcement rather than challenge. Sunny Hostin took her place as the panel's legal voice, speaking with authority and confidence. Her delivery was firm and emotionally charged, designed to project certainty and command attention. At first glance, it sounded persuasive and decisive, the kind of presentation audiences had come to expect from her role at the table. However, as the discussion continued, the structure behind the arguments became clearer. Much of what was said relied on familiar phrases and repeated positions rather than fresh analysis or detailed reasoning. The confidence was there, but the foundation leaned more on passion than on carefully built logic. That contrast is what made the turning point so striking. When the conversation shifted and the pressure increased, the polished delivery could no longer carry the moment on its own. Without the usual support of agreement around the table, the arguments began to show strain. Once the spotlight moved fully in her direction, the dynamic changed completely. The comfort of predictable reactions disappeared, and with it went the ability to stay on script. In that instant, the segment stopped being routine television and became something far more revealing.
Hostin's obsession with race gets thrown back in her face. Today's video comes to us from Sunny Hostin. Sounds like a town. We're in Sunny Hostin. She was on PBS's Finding Your Roots, a show dedicated to researching celebrity ancestry. For context, Sunny is a staunch supporter of reparations and has made a fortune spewing nonsense about white privilege and racial justice. Well, turns out she's not as oppressed as she claims she is. She's actually the descendant of slave owners from Europe. Here's how she took.
For those who don't regularly watch The View, imagine a political comment section brought into a studio setting. Bright lights, steady applause, and constant affirmation create an environment where opinions move quickly and confidence rarely gets questioned. Strong takes are rewarded, while careful analysis often struggles to gain traction. Sunny usually fits comfortably into that format. She presents herself as the composed, rational presence at the table, speaking with certainty and authority. As long as no one pushes back too hard, that role holds together and the conversation stays predictable. The problem begins when real challenges enter the discussion. Straightforward counterarguments suddenly shift the tone, and emotional reactions take center stage. Logic gets crowded out, and what could have been a thoughtful exchange turns into a tense standoff. In those moments, subtlety disappears. The show's structure favors strong conviction over careful accuracy and loud delivery over clear reasoning. That atmosphere doesn't just allow conflict, it practically invites it. With those ingredients in place, it was only a matter of time before something boiled over. The setting itself created the conditions for a moment that couldn't stay contained, turning routine commentary into an unavoidable flashpoint.
Oh, I'm a little bit in shock. I just always thought of myself as Puerto Rican, half Puerto Rican. I didn't think I was, my family was originally from Spain and slaveholders.
Yeah. So how are you feeling, my friend?
I think it's actually pretty interesting that my husband and I have shared roots.
Yeah.
So I do appreciate that. And I think it's great for our children to know this information. I guess it's a fact of life that this is how some people made their living, on the backs of others.
Fact of life. Interesting change of tune. For more, we go to our chief Sunny Hostin correspondent for a reaction.
The dynamic shifted the instant Greg Gutfeld entered the exchange. His presence disrupted the show's familiar flow, replacing comfortable agreement with sharp scrutiny. Unlike the usual rehearsed remarks, he brought an approach focused on testing claims rather than smoothing them over, and that change immediately altered the tone of the discussion. Gutfeld doesn't rely on prepared lines or safe phrasing. He addresses points directly, including the ones others tend to avoid. In doing so, he forced the conversation into unfamiliar territory. Sunny appeared unprepared for that shift, stepping into a situation where humor and skepticism were used as tools to examine her statements more closely. As Gutfeld began outlining inconsistencies, the structure of her argument started to weaken. calls for calm and measured discussion clashed with her own repeated use of strong labels, creating a balance that only works when no one challenges it. Once that challenge arrived, the contrast became clear. He continued methodically, citing example after example with steady focus. The pattern he highlighted was hard to ignore. Reactions framed as outrage in some cases suddenly became context in others, depending on who was involved. Each point added weight to the moment, increasing the pressure inside the studio. By the time he finished, long-standing contradictions that once passed without notice were fully exposed. What had previously gone unchallenged was now out in the open, leaving little room for deflection. The exchange no longer followed the show's usual script. It became a direct examination that reshaped the entire segment in real time.
Oh, I'm going to milk this till the end of time. You're right. Anytime she says something stupid, I'm going to go, slave owner! Kat, I just watched that. That's the second time I've watched that. She was tipped off beforehand, right? Because they had to tell her before, so she had time to regroup. They wouldn't just surprise. Really? Do you think? No?
I don't know. I feel like she could have maybe done better. Okay.
Greg Gutfeld methodically walked through his argument with steady focus, laying out a clear pattern in how Sunny reacts depending on who is speaking. When criticism comes from a conservative voice, the response is immediate and intense. Yet when the same issues arise from someone she aligns with, the tone shifts noticeably, replaced by explanations and softened reasoning. What made the moment stand out was how little force he needed to use. There was no shouting or dramatic delivery. Instead, he allowed the contrast and reactions to speak for itself, placing examples side by side and letting viewers draw their own conclusions. The inconsistency became difficult to ignore. Gutfeld highlighted a long-running imbalance in how accountability is applied. Strong demands for scrutiny appear quickly when it fits a certain narrative, while others are defended or excused despite clear ethical questions. The pattern felt familiar to longtime viewers, almost expected, yet rarely addressed so directly. As the points stacked up, the tone of the segment changed completely. It no longer felt like a routine exchange of opinions. It became a moment of exposure, where repeated contradictions were laid bare in real time, without interruption or distraction. The studio reaction reflected that shift. Applause followed, not because one side had been loudly defeated, but because the inconsistency had been clearly revealed. The moment resonated because it wasn't about volume or aggression. It was about clarity, and once the pattern was visible, it couldn't be unseen.
I think that women, white women in particular, want to protect the patriarchy here because it's to their benefit. Yeah. They want to make sure that their husbands do well. They want to make sure that their sons do well. They want to make sure that their children do well. And they want to make sure that they do well. Most of the women in some of these studies are married white women, and they do fall in line with what their husbands are doing.
People have to wonder, where does Sunny Hostin get her opinions? Yeah. Like you said, it's obviously from her husband. She has to tell her what to say on The View, because without it, she's got nothing up.
Inside that studio, loyalty often carries more weight than careful reasoning. Even if every past statement were placed side by side, the response would likely remain the same: dismissal wrapped in confidence and moral certainty. That environment leaves little room for self-examination, especially when familiar narratives are questioned. Sunny Hostin, long known for delivering firm judgments from her seat at the table, appeared unprepared for that same level of scrutiny. When attention turned toward inconsistencies in her own past remarks, the shift was immediate and striking. The composure she often projects gave way to visible strain. The change was not subtle. Viewers watched a rapid emotional turn unfold live, creating a sense of whiplash on screen. A figure accustomed to challenging others suddenly faced the pressure of being challenged herself, and the contrast was impossible to miss. What followed felt less like an exchange of ideas and more like a moment of personal unraveling. Authority gave way to vulnerability in a matter of seconds, catching both the audience and the panel off guard. The reversal reshaped the tone of the entire segment. The reaction at the table was just as telling. Co-hosts quickly shifted their posture, softening their voices and stepping in protectively. The dynamic suggested that even basic fact-checking had crossed an unspoken line. In that moment, the discussion stopped being about the issue itself and became about defending one of their own.
Joy Behar gets racism after all. She's been black on Halloween. Yeah. But Joy wasn't there on the show. Apparently Mondays are her days off when she feeds in the pasture. But that is convenient, right? It's like one of my aunts dies every time Brian Kilmeade wants to hang out. Maybe Joy needs a full day to read her hate mail, and that's just from the rest of the cast. So Scott had to deal with Sunny Hostin and her typical self-righteous.
Rather than addressing the contradiction directly, the moment was quickly reframed as something deeply personal. The discussion shifted towards sensitivity and emotional impact, as if the issue required protection instead of examination. Accountability gave way to reassurance, and the original point quietly slipped out of focus. Whoopi Goldberg stepped in and guided the conversation toward intentions and feelings, suggesting that context and emotion mattered more than consistency. Facts were no longer the center of the exchange. Comfort became the priority, replacing the earlier call for clarity and balance. Behind the scenes, the response reportedly treated the situation as a delicate incident instead of what many viewers saw it as, a public figure facing tough questioning. The tone suggested that scrutiny itself was the problem, not the inconsistencies that sparked it. That shift spoke volumes to the audience. The contrast was impossible to miss. Someone long known for openly criticizing others suddenly struggled when the same standard was applied to her. The reversal unfolded live, raw, and unmistakable, leaving viewers glued to the moment. Online, the clip spread rapidly, not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it broke an unspoken rule. Greg Gutfeld did what no one else at the table was willing to do. He challenged the narrative directly and said what usually goes unsaid. That single choice turned an ordinary segment into a moment people couldn't stop talking about.
I like this chick. We didn't think it was the best thing that could have happened to us. Although it did get Joy Behar to wear a mask. You make me sick. It's funny, her being named Joy is like me being named ugly.
He didn't raise his voice or resort to personal attacks. Greg simply stated what had suddenly become obvious to anyone watching. That clarity landed hard. Sunny's reaction showed just how powerful a calm observation can be when it cuts straight to the point. The contrast between the two was striking. Greg remained measured and controlled, choosing his words carefully and letting each one do its work. Sunny, meanwhile, appeared rattled, struggling to hold onto the confidence that had defined her presence moments earlier. The shift happened quickly and played out in full view of the audience. Within minutes, the moment escaped the studio and took over social media. Clips spread rapidly, not because of shouting or spectacle, but because viewers witnessed authority give way under pressure. It was the kind of moment that feels unscripted and real, which is exactly why it resonated. Reactions followed, just as fast. Some highlighted the exposed contradictions, while others focused on how quickly certainty can dissolve when challenged directly. Even people casually scrolling through their feeds stopped to watch, drawn in by the irony of a frequent critic struggling when the focus turned inward. Greg's understated delivery amplified the impact. His dry tone reflected a broader fatigue shared by many viewers. Weariness with repeated outrage, shifting standards, and selective accountability. In that brief exchange, the conversation tapped into something larger, explaining why it lingered long after the segment ended.
Did you watch the whole thing or just the parts that I sent you?
I watched it. Obviously, just the parts that you said. Did I watch a whole episode of The View?
No woman can do that unless you're stupid. But
I have a job.
Here's the thing. How can they call themselves progressives when they keep saying that nothing has progressed? Then it's on them.
Right. I just wish I could have, what I would have watched if I could, would have been Joy Behar watching that.
Yes.
And being like, I totally made the right call. It was not an accident that they had him there on her day off.
Yes.
When she was, presented herself as the, expert on systemic racism.
The exchange continued with a blunt clarification. The response made it clear that only the specific clips being discussed were watched, not the entire episode. The focus wasn't on consuming the full broadcast, but on analyzing the moments that actually mattered and drove the public reaction. That led into a sharper point about credibility. The question raised was simple but pointed. How can a movement describe itself as progressive while repeatedly arguing that nothing has improved? If the message is that progress never happens, then responsibility for that outcome has to be examined as well. There was also an observation about who was present and who wasn't. Attention turned to Joy Behar's absence, with the suggestion that her decision not to appear that day may have been intentional. Some viewers speculated she avoided a situation where the conversation could shift in an unpredictable direction. The timing stood out. The episode featured a guest known for challenging narratives on a day when another strong voice from the panel was not there to steer the discussion. That absence changed the balance of the table and opened space for tougher questioning. Taken together, the moment highlighted how much control and planning goes into televised discussions. Who is on set, who is off, and who is positioned as the authority all shape the outcome. And in this case, those choices may have mattered just as much as what was actually said on air.